What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over hitboxes in the Super Smash Brothers tutorial. So I'll just get right into it, but if you have seen the fighting game tutorial for hitboxes or any of the hitbox episodes that I've done, this one's going to be a little bit different. So it's going to follow the same concepts because at their core, hitboxes are just there to check collision. You can do all sorts of things with them, like check if the collision was in the center of the sword or at the end of this boxing glove or something like that. But at the end of the day, it's just checking collision to determine what we want to do with that. So we're going to do basic collision today, just to have something started. So when we use an attack, we'll visualize the hitbox and actually be able to damage our enemy. So you can see where I'm at. I'm going to use an attack as soon as I figure out what my attack button is. There we go. I couldn't remember what button I made it. Whoops. So you can see that I'm able to spawn hitboxes and they destroy themselves, and they will damage opponents if they hit them. Now we'll also make sure that when we run into them ourselves, we don't take damage. You can see I would be player 1, and when I hit the hitbox, I do not receive any damage. There are a few things we won't be doing today, such as different types of hitboxes and hurt boxes. Those will be in another episode. Also, one other thing that will be in another episode, because we have yet to cover how this works, is if you if you want to determine if your player is facing a certain direction and make sure that they can only face left or right as opposed to facing the center of the screen, we'll have to use that to determine where we want the hitbox to spawn. So right now it's spawning to my right where I want my attack to go, but only if I'm facing right. If I'm facing left, it still goes to my right. So it's a limitation right now. Don't worry, it'll come in the next episode. But in the next episode, we have to cover making sure our player can only face left and right when we change directions, not go to this weird middle state or any of these diagonal states in between. We can just flip them and force them to be a certain rotation based on what direction we're trying to move. So we'll use that for next episode, but I wanted to point it out. I'd like to be fully transparent with what we're going to accomplish in the episode. Alright, and I don't know, again, forgive me, but you can see all these guys have the have hitboxes for their attacks. If I could remember what all of them were, I would go ahead and use them for you. There we go. You can't see his because his went into the wall because it was to his right, but there you go. So everyone can use hitboxes. It's not like player specific or anything like that. There we go. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into it. This episode is going to be different from my other hitbox episodes, mainly because we're going to be using spheres instead of cubes. So spheres instead of cuboids, sometimes they're referred to. But if you've seen my hitbox episodes for the fighting game or any of my hitbox episodes, you'll notice that we use a cube. We use a literal square or a cube, depending if it's 2D or 3D, and we determine if the collision was between that square and or cube and the object that we want to collide with. In this case, we're using these spheres. The reason we are using these is because Super Smash Brothers uses them, so I figured let's copy it and make sure it's as authentic to the Super Smash Brothers experience as possible. Okay, so there's a few things we're going to need to do before we get into any of the spawning of the hitboxes and stuff, of course. And we are going to need to create something that can be spawned as a hitbox. So if we go into, I have in my art folder in materials, I got some materials here which I have open. And then I also have a hitbox actor, which I've made a code class for, and then childed a blueprint off of that. So we'll start with the hitbox stuff in general, just making a hitbox. Before spawning it, we need to make the class to know what we're going to spawn. So if you go ahead and add new, go to new C++ class, and go ahead and select actor, hit next, and then type in the name that you want. So in my case, I called it Hitbox Actor. You can just call it Hitbox if you'd like, and hit Create Class. It should open Visual Studio up for you. And for some reason, they're no longer open. So allow me to close some of my tabs here and open my Hitbox Actor. Okay. So when you load up, you'll have some basic stuff here. You'll have your includes, and you'll have your constructor and your tick function, as well as your begin play. So there's only a few things we're going to add here, don't worry. But basically we're going to set up our hitbox so that it can perform damage, be moved to a specific location we want, and we want to be able to determine its type as well. Because right now we're just doing basic collision. We want to know if this object has collided with our enemy. However, in Super Smash Brothers, if you ever look at like frame data for attacks for fighting games or specifically Super Smash Brothers, you'll see there's a ton of hitboxes or a ton of different points within these hitboxes where colliding with an enemy actually has a separate effect. It might do more damage, it might have a chance to crit, things like that. So we're just going over regular collision right now, but we do want to have the option to extend our hitboxes to do more functionality in the future. To do that, we're going to go ahead and make an enum class. You could also make an enum struct. It's not a big deal either way. I'm going to make it a class right here, and I'm going to make it strike hitboxes and hurt boxes. For those that aren't familiar, so a strike hitbox is what I refer to as a hitbox that does damage. This is your standard. I use an attack, it spawns a hitbox. If the hitbox collides with the player, they take damage. The hurt box is what's going to determine if the player was hit. It'll basically surround the player and follow them around. You don't have to do this. We can easily do it without. In fact, in this episode, we aren't even using hurt boxes to determine damage. But a lot of times hurt boxes exist because they might want to get super armor or become invincible and all these different things. So usually a hurt box is used to color code things. Also, it can be used to change what a character's hitbox really is. Maybe you don't want it to be the exact shape of the character. Maybe he's got a long coat on or something and his coat whips open at one point of his attack. Well, maybe you don't want that part of the coat to be part of his health. So hurt boxes can be used to essentially determine a character's shape if we don't want to use their specific mesh shape. Okay, so go ahead and copy this. This is how you make an enum class. An enum class stands for an enumeration, which is just basically these values like hitbox strike, HB underscore strike, and hitbox hurtbox are assigned to integers. So this is actually 0 and this is 1. And when we use these, we can basically treat them as states so we know exactly how to handle the situation. Go ahead and add hitbox damage variable, hitbox location variable, and hitbox enum variable. Now the hitbox enum is the class we just made. So whatever you called your enum class here is the same variable, or is the same type that you should put for this variable. So hitbox type, obviously you're going to determine if it's a strike or a hurtbox. Hitbox location will be used to determine where the hitbox should spawn. You can attach these to the player as well if you want to attach it to his fist or something like that. Perfectly fine. You don't always want to do this, so for now we're going to be setting a hard-coded location, but we might attach it to certain parts of our characters later on in the series. For now, hitbox location as an F vector is fine. And then hitbox damage, of course, determines how much damage the enemy will receive if they're hit by the hitbox. This is all in your header file. So once you're done adding those variables, go into your CPP file for your hitbox actor. And I just set my default values in the constructor, like usual. So I don't set a hitbox location or a hitbox type because, well, for one, enum by default will always be the top value. So it'll technically be a strike hitbox by default, but also because I don't necessarily have a default. Sure, strike is probably the most common, but it doesn't mean that it's the default value for that or anything like that. So you can set them if you'd like. A lot of times I won't end up setting things like that. I set more variables like floats to 0, integers to 0, things like that. So I don't have an exact location. Feel free to spawn a new F vector and set it to 0 for the location and set the hitbox type to strike. Otherwise, just set your hitbox damage to 0, and you don't have to do anything else. We're going to do all the hitbox logic in Blueprint. And in fact, that's all the code we're going to be doing for today. Okay, so if we go into our code, or into our Unreal, not our code, then we need to go ahead and make an actor blueprint based off of that hitbox class we just made so we can give it a mesh and such. So this is the hitbox actor. It's got a hitbox display, which is a literal sphere. So go ahead and go to where you want. I put mine in Blueprint, Functional BPs, Logic, Hitbox Actor BP. So add new, Blueprint class. Search in all classes for your Hitbox Actor. Right here. This is our code class that we just made, and go ahead and select that. You'll have a new object right here. Now, don't be confused. It'll look like this by default, but you don't actually have anything in here. You'll have this default scene root, and that's it. You want to make sure you make a sphere. See, it's smaller than the default scene root, so you don't actually have this by default. So go ahead and hit Add Component, and literally type sphere. And just sphere, you don't need sphere collision. This can be very useful, but since we're going to be visualizing it for the time being, we can use a regular sphere. It's quite easy to switch it out later if we want to for memory reasons and performance reasons, but for now, a regular one is fine. I called mine Hitbox Display. I just renamed it. And there's a few things you're going to want to set here. So first of all, it doesn't have to simulate physics or anything, but you will want it to overlap all in the collision presets in the details panel, and you will want to make sure generate overlap events is checked. This basically just means that, okay, are we checking if we are overlapping an object? And we want to be checking that because we're going to determine if the sphere is overlapping the enemy to perform damage. I also went ahead and made it visible false by default, simply because we're going to move the actor to the location and also set its material after it spawns, because we don't want to keep all these in memory, otherwise it would eat up a ton of memory if the fight was going on for too long. So we want to do this on the fly, and if we do this, if we have it visible by default, you'll actually see it move or change colors, which will look a little ugly, so it's better to keep it as visible by default. We will enable it later. Okay, in your event graph, there's some stuff we've got to do here, and we will get into this. I'll start showing it, but we'll have to switch between this and our animation blueprint, where we're spawning the hitbox, because it'll make a little bit more sense if we see the context. So just to show you to start off, I don't use begin play or tick or anything in this episode. I make two new custom events, a spawn hitbox event and a check collision event. So if you want to go ahead and make two new events, just right click and hit add custom event, and then you can rename them whatever you want. Again, spawn hitbox, check collision. These events are what I'm going to use to determine if the object has collided with the enemy player. Now, since we are not currently attaching the sphere to some part of our character, we're going to need to spawn the actor and then set his location, his type, and his damage. And the reason we have to do that is because it's going to be specific to each attack. Each attack will be different, so we don't necessarily want to do this for one individual hitbox. We want to be able to make sure we can change the values very quickly for as many hitboxes as we want to have. Alright, so once you've made these events, there's a few things we're going to do. We're going to set the material of the hitbox. Now I've made two materials here, a strike hitbox which is red and a hurt box which is green. We're not going to be doing anything with the hurt box today like I mentioned, but I did want to make the material and show you kind of how we're going to do the setup for that. So the hurt box will be green. To make two new materials, or as many hitbox materials as you plan on having, go to your art, or whatever folder you have it in. I have mine in art materials. Right click, hit materials and textures, and material right here. Once you make a new one, call it whatever you want. I'm under the usual guidelines of M underscore and then the name of it, just because that's what I'm used to, but you can call it whatever you want. This just basically means material, hurtbox, material, strike, hitbox. Go into them, right click and type in vector parameter, and then this is the color that you can give your hitbox. You can double click on this and set it to be whatever color you want. So if I want it to be orange, then I take this top node here, this is the full color, and then this will make this hitbox orange. And apparently I did not save, so I apologize. I thought I hit okay, but it did not. So let's make it lime green then, in this case. Okay, it's lime green. We hit OK. There you go. It's like a yellow, really, but... And we can easily change the color of our hitbox. Okay. Feel free to play around with that, but that's all I want to show you for now. Same with Hitbox, I just made it green. So these materials are good to go. I'm going to save them just because I did change it. I want it to apply everywhere. Yes. Okay, so now we have our materials, we have our hitbox. So what we should do right off the bat is we determine what hitbox type this is that was just spawned, and we want to make sure that we set the material so it looks correctly. So instead of having a bunch of different hitbox actors, we can just change the material on the one we want. By default, you'll notice I put the red on it, the strike hitbox material, but you don't have to do this. You could even just leave it blank. In our spawn hitbox event, we're going to grab our hitbox type, which is our enum variable that we have in here. By the way, make sure these are blueprint read-write in the U property here. That way we can see them in blueprint. If you haven't already, make sure you build solution, and then once it completes in the output log, go ahead over to Unreal and hit compile. And once that completes, you'll be able to see all the variables and functions we made. So grab your hitbox type, do a switch on it. So literally switch. And then determine if you are using a strike or a hurt box. So we are going to set this in the animation blueprint. So that's why I said I'll have to be switching between them. So let's go to our anim BP to make more sense of this and see why we're doing it this way. Okay, so if we're in our animation blueprint, we have attacks we can do. We have this state machine set up, right? Well, great, but the attacks aren't doing any sort of damage. They're just playing an animation. We need to have a way to spawn a hitbox when an attack is played and delete it when it is cleaned up. When the attack is ended or when we return to idle, and we don't want that hitbox to be active any longer. So, first things first, we need to have a way to spawn the hitbox. So, to spawn a hitbox, we're going to make a function to be able to create a hitbox actor, this guy that we just made, but then also be able to change the settings we want based on the attack we've done. So I made a function called create active hitbox. You can go ahead and hit the little plus here in functions and call it whatever you want. Again, I called it create active hitbox. You can call it create hitbox, whatever. And you'll just have this node to start out with. So what we're going to have to do is spawn actor hitbox actor BP. So literally type in spawn actor from class, and then select the class right here and type in hitbox actor BP. There you go. There are a few things we'll need here. So we need a transform and an owner. You don't technically need the owner, but the owner will help us determine who created the hitbox. That way we know not to damage ourselves with it. And if you have some attacks where you can damage yourselves, that's fine. There's no harm in that. But for the majority of attacks, you probably don't want to be able to hurt yourself with your hitbox. So doing this little additional node here will make that basically impossible. So right here is my spawn hitbox actor BP. Go ahead and type try get pawn owner. This right here. That's this node that I've got. This try get pawn owner will essentially, it'll see if I can get the owner of this object. So the object is our anim BP. Who owns this object? Well, technically our character does, our character blueprint, because if you go to blueprints, functional BPs, where I have my character blueprint, you can see that in the mesh, the skeletal mesh is using, or excuse me, you can see in the mesh that the animation is using an animation blueprint, and it has the default anim BP class as the anim BP. So this blueprint, our character blueprint, owns the anim BP. Okay, that's our pawn owner here. So that's what that's doing. That's assigning it to our character class, essentially. So plug that in as your owner, and then we need a transform. Transform determines where the object spawns, so we 100% need this. Now, right off the bat, it's easiest to just use your player's transform as the solution here. There's a few ways you can do this. My favorite way is to just set it as a variable in the beginning. That way we can use it later on. Now, if you haven't been following the series up to this point, I do want to mention that we're on episode, I believe, 11, maybe a little bit more, a little bit less of this series. If you want to catch up, now could be a good time to do it. I'll leave an iCard with the link in the top right corner, simply because we're getting into a lot of stuff that we've done before at this point and is part of the series already that I won't be covering. So I just wanted to let you know that's what's going on. Now, if you have been following the series or you're good with that, you don't need that, that's fine. But I'm going to show you something here that we've been doing that is going to change a little bit. So in our animation blueprint, in our event graph, we have it so we were making all these anim variables, which is basically taking the variables that we had in our character class, is charging, has use basic, has use forward attack, and making an anim variable in the animation blueprint. Well, this is actually pretty bad practice. So it's fine, it's easy, and it works, but we can go ahead and just assign a reference to our character in this class, character reference here, and then we'll be able to use this reference in the anim BP as much as we want, and we won't have to do this all the time. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all three of these variables, as well as all this code here, where we were casting to the SSB template character and setting all of our anim variables. I'm going to delete all of them, just to keep you guys in the loop with what I'm doing. And now that they're gone, I'm also going to delete their variables. Okay, now don't worry, we're going to obviously fix this and make it work again. If you're following my lead and doing that as well, we're going to have to change them in the animation state machine too. So to do that, we're going to need some way to reference our code class. Alright, now to do this, to reference our code class, we're going to need something called a reference. So go ahead and make a new variable, hit plus variable, and then find your character's class. This can be your code class or your blueprint class. Either way, I like to do the code class because the code class has access to everything. So, worst case scenario, we have access to everything we need. Mine is called SSB template character. So find that and then just select object reference right here. And then rename it to be whatever you like. So I called mine character reference. So I'm going to delete this new one I made. Oops, I'm going to delete this new one I made. But there is the character reference variable. So now we're going to move things back. Now, just quick note, the begin, play, and update animations should not be doing the same thing like they are doing here. We're going to fix that later. It's not really a problem, but it's technically bad practice. We'll fix it later when we get into more game flow stuff in the series. So for now, if you've left it like this, it's perfectly fine. Don't worry. I'm going to leave it like this too. Just follow this code flow. We try and get pawn owner. We make sure it's valid. If it is valid, we cast it to an SSB template character. If the cast succeeds, so not if it fails, if it succeeds, we set our character reference. So just drag off of this and type set character reference right here. As a shortcut, if you want to make this variable without adding a new variable, then finding the class and selecting object reference and all that, you can drag off of your cast and hit promote to variable. It'll do the same thing. This is now a SSB template character object reference. If I could get it to highlight, there you go. So again, I'm going to delete that because I don't need it. But I wanted to show you that's another quick way you can do that. Great, we have our character reference, so we'll switch that over. But we need something else from here too. We also need to get our player transform. Remember, that's the whole reason we came over here. So our player transform comes from our character as well, right? Except we don't have to do it on the cast. We can do it right off the try get pawn owner. You can do it off the cast if you'd like. Basically, it doesn't matter. The point is, whatever object we have here that we're controlling, whether it be from here or here, we need to get the actor's transform. So drag off of try and get pawn owner and type get actor transform. This node right here. And then do the little trick I showed you to set a player transform variable. Drag off of it and hit promote to variable. And there you go. We have a player transform. Call it player transform. And I've already got one, so it won't let me. So I'll call it 2, and then I'll delete it. So I've set it here. And now we know exactly where our player is at all stages of the game. Because the blueprint update animation is basically a tick function for animation blueprints. So this is always updating. Thus, we will always have a player transform that is accurate. Okay. And now you can see I don't have any of that extra garbage that we were doing. Cool. That's great news. And now we have a transform. But let's take a quick break and let's go into our animation state machine. That way we can fix up the old references we had to those anim variables. So in all of your attacks where we had logic like has used basic attack anim, now all you're going to do is switch it out from that to grab your character reference first. You can drag it onto the screen like this or search for it. And then look for the variable type that we have in code, has used basic attack. And then put that into the result node. Just to clarify, the has used basic attack is this variable that comes directly from, if I could find it, directly from the Super Smash Brothers template character. These booleans that we were using to set those anim variables can now just be used outright. As usual, I'll delete this because I don't need it, but there you go. Now do that for all your attacks. So we have basic attack, we have forward attack, and we were also using it for charging. So instead of is charging anim, grab your character reference, grab is charging, and then grab not. Okay? There you go. Now our system is much better, much cleaner, and yeah, it's just overall better. So we can use that to our advantage. Figured I would show you guys that while we're here. Okay, it's also important to note that I didn't have the basic attack charging before. I made a new attack when I did my charge attack episode. If you want to go ahead and add functionality to charge your basic attack, feel free. It's the same exact logic as your forward attack smash. I made sure we're not charging anymore when we do our basic attack smash, which is just the end of the attack here. And then I have the same logic to return to idle. Basically, I just return to idle automatically once the animation is finished, and that's all there is to it. So if you want to copy this tutorial exactly, just take what you did for your forward attack smash, add it to your basic attack smash. But this part is not necessary. I just wanted to point it out that I did it. Okay, so let's get into the hitbox creation. That's the last thing we need to do, right? It's the last thing we need to prove here is that our hitbox actor can be spawned and teleported to the correct spot. So go back to your create active hitbox function. Now we have a player transform, so we can go ahead and use that for our spawn transform in our spawn hitbox actor blueprint. Now, since we have a hitbox actor BP, it has a return value. This return value can be used to set variables within the object here. So we can set the type, the damage, and the location of our hitbox actor BP. Remember, those are our variables within our hitbox actor. Type, damage, and location. So if you drag off the return value, we can now set everything we want. Right now, I'm setting everything to a standard hard-coded value. What we'll do in the future, in the next episode, we'll add inputs here that we can pass in for every attack. That way they do different damages, they appear in different locations, and they can be different hitbox types. So, like I said, drag off and hit set and do all of these. Hitbox type, right here, I set that to strike. This is a strike hitbox. Then drag off of it and hit set hitbox damage. Right here. And then set the damage, 15. This isn't a health in the Super Smash Brothers tutorial. This is the percentage that you gain. So every time they get hit by this, they gain 15%. Then I also have set hitbox location. Now, hitbox location, again, in this case is just kind of hard-coded, so I'll show you what I did, but feel free to play around with this as much as you like. I brought my player transform into the world. Okay, I have this in the graph here. Then I right-click and I hit split struct pin. Then I right-click on the player transform location and split struct pin again. What I'm doing here, every time you split struct pin, you're splitting an object, and you're accessing the other variables. So let me undo that so I can show you. Player transform. Now I can do get location. Or sorry, I can do break transform. That's what it is. And then I can see my location, rotation, and scale. That's fine. We can do that. There's nothing wrong with that. If it's easier, do this, and then grab from your location and break that vector as well. And now you have your X, Y, and Z location. Okay? Or you can do this, where you do player transform. Then you split your struct. And you split your struct again. And then go ahead and set the hitbox location. The reason I'm splitting this in the first place is because if we spawn our hitbox directly at our player transform, he's going to spawn directly at the center of our character. We don't want that. We want to spawn it where we think the hitbox is going to do damage. For example, if the hitbox is going to be at the guy's fist, and we're not attaching it to our guy's fist, we want to make sure that it appears and is moved to our guy's fist. Simple enough. So, in my case, the y-axis is what needs to be changed. For example, if I left this at 0, and I go ahead and I make my character, and I go ahead and use my attack, well, the hitbox spawns directly in the center of me. So what I want to do is move it to the right. Or more accurately, we're going to move it to the direction that they're facing and to the appropriate position. So if I made this 150, I believe is what I had, then this is 150 units to the right. Now when I attack, it appears on my right side. So that's why I'm splitting this, so I can change individual values within our player transform to set our hitbox location. Now if you're wondering how I have hitbox location like this, go ahead and drag off your hitbox actor, set hitbox location, and then do the same thing that I did earlier. Right click and split struct pin. Then it gives you all the floats, so you don't have to make a vector. And that's what I have here. So you can see I've done the second of these two options, and then I've just brought the X and Z values directly into our hitbox location, but I've modified the Y value so it's to the right of my character. Now we've set our hitbox type, damage, and location, so we're ready to, I call it spawn hitbox, but really we've already spawned the hitbox. This should be like make hitbox active or make hitbox visible and things like that, because this is where we're going to make the hitbox visible, change the materials, and check the collision. Also, just a good thing to note, once the hitbox has been spawned or activated or whatever we're calling this, we should also add our active hitboxes, or we should add this hitbox to some sort of container so that we can clean them up later. Otherwise, our memory will be huge if the fight goes on for too long, and that'll be an issue. So what we're going to do now is just add a quick array. So you can, again, add variable, click on the class type, and type hitbox actor BP, and grab an object reference. Now, make sure you go over to your details panel here. You see this, the details panel? And select the little circle or the little square, whatever symbol it is, sometimes it's a pill, and make it an array. So select that actual symbol and make it an array. So we can hold as many hitboxes as we spawn in this array. And then we'll know on certain cues that we can trigger, we'll know to clean up the elements in this array. That way our memory stays low and our performance stays good. Then once you've made that, just go ahead and hit add. So drag into the scene and hit add. And then you can drag off of the hitbox actor BP return value. You can see this node is the whole thing. I brought it all the way over here. And you can drag this right into your add. Okay. Now, you're good to go with that. We've spawned our hitbox, we've activated our hitbox, and we added it to the array. So the last thing we need to do is actually determine what happens once our hitbox spawns and then get rid of it. Okay. So, our hitbox spawns when our player uses an attack, and then we want to set the variables within our hitbox. So remember, the spawn hitbox event that we're just calling right here, this is the custom event that we made in the hitbox actor BP. See spawn hitbox and check collision? Spawn hitbox, that's what we're calling right here. So we're calling spawn hitbox because we're going to set the material. Now we know what these are, so this becomes a lot more useful. We grab our hitbox type, do a switch, and if it's the strike hitbox, we set it to the strike the strike hitbox material, the red one. Otherwise, we set it to the hurtbox material, the green one. Then we go ahead and use the set world location node. And let me actually drop back for a second. The hitbox display, if you want to set the materials like I'm doing here, you might not be able to find the hitbox display. This is whatever you called your sphere that you brought into the area here. When you hit add component, add a sphere, whatever you renamed it to is what this is. So if you can't find hitbox display, find out whatever you named this. It might just be sphere. Worst case scenario, just literally drag it from here onto the screen. That also works. And then drag off of this and type set material. Then select your material here. And then you have a little reference to what type you want. So, for example, I can see this is green, so this is the hurtbox. Figured I should explain that a little bit in depth because we haven't done that before. Okay, so now we have our material. Now we want to set our world location. We want to use our hitbox location variable. So, drag off the hitbox display again. Hit set world location. Just like that. Then type in hitbox location. This is our variable that we set earlier. Drag it into the location and you're good to go. Then we want to set the visibility. Now the hitbox has the proper materials and they have the proper location. Remember I said you might want to have it invisible by default? Well, great. Now we want it to be visible because at this point it's ready to be seen. So grab your hitbox display, set visibility, and new visibility. This boolean, if it's unchecked, it's false. If it's checked, it's true. So new visibility checked means it is visible. Otherwise, it is not visible. We want it to be visible, so leave it at checked. And now our hitbox will be able to be seen in the game. What we need to do with that hitbox is determine if there was a collision between the hitbox and an enemy player or an object or whatever we're trying to collide with. So now I'm calling my check collision event. This is my other custom event. If you haven't made this already, remember, add custom event. Now, if you have already made it, that's fine. Just when you go to call it, just literally type in the name of the event. It's that simple. It'll say call function. All right. Now, in check collision, we're going to do logic to determine if we've collided with someone that's not ourselves, or not our owner, not the owner of the hitbox, and then perform damage, or make them take damage if it's not us. So in our check collision event, go ahead and do something called get overlapping actors. Remember we set the hitbox display to have collision presets of overlap all. This is why. We're going to check our get overlapping actors because you could also be colliding with more than one at a time. Get overlapping actors. You can just choose the first one here in collision. And then class filter. You don't need to use this. It's fully optional. But this will only return actors of a certain class. So this technically will cut down on space or on memory and increase your performance a little bit if you don't need to collide with multiple things. If you need to have breakable objects that when you punch you can collide with them, then you don't want to use this filter. And in fact, we'll probably actually remove the filter when we get into breakable objects. But for now, if you'd like to keep it, or if you don't have any plans for having breakable objects, then this works perfectly fine. You could also actually do 2 of these and do one for your character and one for your breakable objects, and it would still probably be faster than checking all overlapping actors because you don't want to check overlapping actors where the actors cannot take any damage. No point to check or add actors to this array if they're like some random wall that you can't break. It doesn't really help us in any way. But go ahead and select the class of the enemy that you want. So in our case, it's just another SSB template character. We're an SSB template character, but our enemies are also SSB template characters. So I just type that in and then select it. Now, it returns an array. It returns all of the actors that are overlapping from that class. So go ahead and drag off of that and just do a for each loop right here. You can see I've done that. And then drag off of your array element, that's the individual actor from this for loop, and do a not equal. So literally exclamation mark equal, It says not equal, or you can type not equal. When you do this, it'll bring up this node right here, and it'll ask you to put in something that you want to compare it to. We want to make sure the actor that we're overlapping with is not equal to our owner. We're in the hitbox actor BP. So if this hitbox is colliding with an SSB template character, which we are, we don't want to damage ourselves. So we want to make sure this is not equal to our owner. So type get owner, and then bring these together. If this element is not equal to the owner of the hitbox, then we can go ahead and damage that player that we are colliding with. So go ahead and do a branch. Just make sure if it is not, right, this is not equal. So if this is not equal to the owner, if that's true that it's not equal, then we want to do our logic. Don't do anything on false. Now, you're probably wondering why I'm doing a cast here. You're like, isn't this only returning SSB template characters? Yes, but Unreal for some reason returns an array of actors as opposed to changing the return to this. So you'll have to do a cast with your array element after we determine that we should make them take damage, and make sure you cast it to the character that they are. We know because of this filter that's an SSB template character. It's actually an SSB template character BP that I decided to use in that case. Doesn't matter if you use the blueprint or the code class. But cast, make sure it's the character, and then go ahead and call determine damage counter value. It's kind of a weird function name. I should probably change this to like add damage. But if you remember back from the very first episode of this series, I have a function called determine damage counter value right here, which actually just takes in a damage and it adds it to your damage counter. So that's how your percent goes up. If you're at 15% and your hitbox does 15 more percent damage, and you collide with that, then you'll have 30% damage. Okay, so there you go. Now the player, or the character that collided with your hitbox will take damage. Whew, alright. So that was a lot of work, but we successfully did that. Now the last thing we need to do is actually be able to call this function. We made the create active hitbox function, but we didn't actually do anything to call it anywhere. So we're going to call it when we have something called anim notifies. So they're animation notifies. What it means is when you reach a certain part of an animation, then perform this action. We can actually use these to perform attacks, if I could speak, and we can use them to create and clean up hitboxes, things like that. So you can see this is my basic attack smash animation. So anywhere where I feel like the hitbox should become active. So at this point, maybe not, maybe not. At this point, and even probably a little bit earlier, I would be doing damage to my opponent if I hit them at this part of the animation. So I want to spawn the hitbox. So I make something called an anim notify. Then once the animation is done, like at this point, if someone walks into me, well, I'm not really swinging my arm anymore, so I don't want to still damage them. The hitbox should be cleaned up at this point. Then we'll make another anim notify to clean them up. And the rest of the animation is kind of just there to return us to the idle state. Okay, so what we're doing here is we can go into our state machine, if you like, and kind of go to your states where you think you would want to spawn hitboxes. Or you can just look at any point in your anim BP, look at the right side with the asset browser, find the animations that you know are used for attacks or that will have additional hitboxes, and go ahead and go to each of them. We're not using basic crouch attack yet in this game, so I'm going to skip that one. But I do have basic attack smash, forward attack smash, and great sword jump attack, which will all have it. Just to note, the basic attack and the forward attack don't have them because they are technically the charge up of my attacks. Since we can charge attacks in this game, they're before any damage is going to be applied to our opponent, before we spawn any hitboxes. So for me, it's this attack, and this attack. And that one is super fast, but It doesn't matter what your attacks are, it just matters that you know which ones they are so we can make anim notifies. So, in all your attacks with animations where you want to spawn your hitboxes, you can go ahead and pause the animation right here, and then use this little timeline down below to determine what frame you want to go to and add these anim notifies. So, you'll have this little track up here. These are where your notifies go. You can right-click anywhere on this track, but it'll place it where your red line is. So bring your anim notify to where you want it. I wanted my hitbox to spawn here. So I brought my red line here. I right-clicked on the track here, and I hit add notify, new notify, and then it'll come up with a name. Now, I'm not going to put anything in because this will stay forever in there, and I don't want to add a new one. But add this whatever you want. So I called mine default character basic attack active. And I know that's quite a long name, but I like to differentiate my characters anim notifies. Because if you have multiple characters with the same skeleton, your anim notifies are related to your skeleton. So without going too far into it, if you have multiple characters that are the mannequin or use the mannequin skeleton but have different meshes, then you're going to have different anim notifies for all those attacks. So I like to be very explicit with what I'm doing here. Default character is the character that owns this attack. Basic attack is the name of the attack. And then this is the state. So active meaning the hitbox should spawn. I don't know if I can actually... Okay, I can. Cool. I wasn't sure if I could get out of that window without spawning a new hitbox. Okay, and then I also have a new one here that I want to do called ended, which is when I'm going to want to clean up the hitbox and such. Now, you only have one track by default if this is the first time you come in here. You can hit plus on any of these and add tracks in different spots. You can go ahead and add them wherever you'd like, so hit plus, and there you go. You can also hit minus to get rid of that track. I have two because I wanted an anim notify to be at this spot, but if I tried to put it here, I would keep clicking on this anim notify. So you make a new track just so you can kind of organize this a little bit better. So once you make a new track, it'll be empty. Right click, add new notify. Do the same thing. Default character, basic attack, ended. And I'm going to save this, but you'll see this is the same for all these attacks. So my jump attack is default character, basic jump attack, active and ended. And then this is default character, forward attack, active and ended. Active, ended. Okay. And there you go. So those are my anim notifies. Now we have to actually use the anim notifies so that when those occur in the animation, we can go ahead and actually create the hitbox and clean up the hitboxes when it's ended as well. Okay. So we were already doing some logic before to reset variables when states were finished. That way they wouldn't continuously loop. But remember that we've now changed our system up a little bit. So we're no longer using those anim variables. We're using the character reference to then grab our actual variables in the code and set them. So I'm going to go over the things that have changed with that new system. Instead of just resetting them when attacks end or when states change, or resetting them back immediately, we're going to be using a new system here where we use these anim notifies and where we add state transitions to reset our variables. So if that doesn't make sense, it's okay. I'll explain what I'm talking about. So if we don't do this part, your attacks will loop forever. You'll press the button once, and then the guy will continuously, he'll do the attack, return to idle, do the attack, return to idle. We have to reset them. So there's a few ways we want to reset them in a few instances. First of all, we want to reset them when our attacks have ended. So remember these anim notifies I just was talking about for our basic forward and basic jump attack. Once they end, we want to make sure none of our booleans are true. It doesn't matter what we pressed at this point. If this animation is ending, we want to reset everything because we don't want to possibly perform these actions again. The player should have to press the input again if they want to perform that animation again. Otherwise, it'll feel a bit clunky. So if you want to perform actions when an anim notify occurs, then you just right-click in your event graph in your anim BP and look for the anim notify name. You can even type in anim notify beforehand. Anim notify, default character, and I've got a lot here, but don't get confused. they're all named, so you can see here my basic attacks, basic jump, and forward attacks. So on all my endeds, my 3 endeds that I have, I want to go ahead and reset my variables, just like this. Grab the character reference, and then set has used basic attack and has used forward attack back to false. Simple enough. It is important to note, we're not going to be setting is charging back to false here, because setting it back to false here would be counterproductive. We're already setting it back to false in the code, so you guys are aware. It's setting back to false once we do the smash attack. We're no longer charging, so they have to start again. If you were to set it to false early, it would actually counteract and ruin this function. We wouldn't be able to use our smash attack, so you get halfway through your attack and just get stuck. That's not good. We don't want that, so don't do that. Make sure you're not doing that. There's 2 other times that I actually do this. You don't have to do these. I'm kind of paranoid because I'm working on the fighting game tutorial as well, and there's a lot of instances, very specific states, and there will be with this game too. So I'd recommend doing this, but it's not necessary. If you'd like to follow me exactly, I also have a return to idle and an idle loop and a notify that I'm using. So if you go to your idle animation, I have a idle loop here that I put right at the very start. So basically, once my character goes back to his idle animation, meaning he's finished whatever attack, walking, taking damage, animation, whatever it is that he has gone through, we want to clean up his variables. Basically, this means once the idle loop has begun, then we want to reset everything. That's when the character or the player can essentially press controls again and make them happen. Now, I won't get into too much why I'm doing this here. There are genuine reasons for it, and you're going to see a lot of changes with this. This will stay the same, but you're going to see why it becomes really important later on in a few episodes. So don't worry, no stress, but I'd recommend doing that. And then return to idle. This is the last one. Now, return to idle is something I do just because I'm really, really trying to be fancy here. So, anytime you're done with an attack, you can click on an animation transition, any of these, and you can scroll down. If you look at the details panel on the right, you can scroll down and go to start transition event, end transition event, and interrupt transition event. Start transition event is the one we care about. Basically, it's saying once this transition has begun and we're going from basic attack smash to the idle state, we can actually call an anim notify. So I also type in return to idle here. Whatever you type in here, you'll be able to call here, or you'll be able to create the logic here. So if I put in return to idle in that event, then I can see return to idle right here. So I have just a lot of safeguards because I don't want any logic that I don't intend for occurring, and I also don't want any hitboxes to slip through. So what you're going to see here is not only do I reset my variables here, but I also clean up my hitboxes. So I go ahead and I grab my active hitboxes and I loop through them. So bring this onto the screen, do a for each loop. Simple enough. Then we go ahead and destroy that actor. Just grab the array element, destroy the actor. Because at this point, we don't want to have that actor existing anymore. We want to clean up the memory, we want to get rid of him. He's no longer useful to us. Make sure you don't clear the array while you're doing this. That would just basically leak a lot of memory, is essentially what you're doing. Technically, that's not the correct term for that. But basically, you're clearing an array without destroying all the actors, so there's references to actors that never get erased, even though the elements in the array are clear, so you don't have a reference to them. And then, yeah, just bad, because then you have additional memory being used you can't ever clean up. So make sure you destroy the actor and don't do anything with it. But then once all the actors have been destroyed in your array, go ahead and on completed, clear the array. So drag off your array hitboxes and type clear. Okay? There you go. So on all these states, all these different instances, we're going to reset our variables and we're going to clear our active hitboxes. That will ensure that no hitboxes should remain in the game when we don't want them to, and we shouldn't get stuck in any like animation loops that we don't want either. Okay. There's really, for real, there's one more thing we need to do. and it's the thing we actually set out to do. We need to create our hitboxes. Remember we made this function where we set everything and we called the spawn hitbox and added it to the array? Well, we never actually called that function. So on all of our active anim notifies for my basic attack, my forward attack, and my basic jump attack, we want to go ahead and call that. These are the same as the ended. You just type in anim notify, and then instead of looking for the endeds, look for all your actives. Use them and create active hitbox for each of them. There you go, guys. So that's how this works. At this point, you now have switched over your references to be, or your anim variables to be from the character reference, which is very good. We've been able to create a hitbox actor, spawn him, and clean him up appropriately. And we've used anim notifies to make our game cleaner, more clean, and also spawn our hitboxes and delete them when necessary. I'm going to show one more thing. It's not necessarily something you have to do, but I wanted to show it because I promised I would. So I'm going to go to my character select screen. Now, I didn't add any of this, so don't worry. But if you've been following the series, the character select screen was determining how many players there were. Since we're in keyboard mode and we don't have a multiplayer menu here, then I can only select one character. Because of this, it was making it so only this left player 1 had their image, damage counter, and their name. If you want to have all 4 of them like I do here, all you have to do, I wrote up a comment here, and you might want to actually add this comment just so you remember in the future. But I called this Enable Disable Keyboard Mode. So in the tutorial, I connect this, num players -1. I connect this to the last index here. So this determines how many players you have, so it determines how many things it should spawn. Well, in keyboard mode, we'd only have 1 player controller. That's what this is looking for. So technically, it would set this to be 1 player. So it would think that we only have 1 player and only spawn 1. If you want to see all 4, just because it looks a little bit better, and because you got plenty of time to develop the game, you can always change it later. Go ahead and just disconnect this. You don't even have to delete it. You can click Alt on your keyboard and then click on a node, and it will clean up the connection. Once you've done that, set the last index to be 3, because 0, 1, 2, 3 is 4, and so you'll have 4 players. And with that, you'll be able to see all 4 of your characters, damage counters, and names on your character HUD again, without getting rid of any of the progress we did in other episodes. There you go, guys. I think that's all I've got for today. So if you enjoyed this video, if it helped you, please subscribe. It does more for the channel than anything else you can do, and it just lets me know that I was doing a good job teaching you and helping you out. Please let me know any suggestions you have as well, or any topics that you want in the comments. You can also feel free to join the Discord. I can't put it in an iCard, but if you just look in the description for Discord, you'll be able to see it. We accept YouTube video requests there, and also I will help you with any of the issues that you had while following this tutorial. This one was a long one, and there's a lot of in-depth stuff here that you've probably never done before, so don't be afraid to reach out. And lastly, guys, if you want to come support us on Twitch, twitch.tv/Shawnthebro27. I play Souls games on Wednesday. We call it Souls Wednesday. So currently I'm working on going for the King in Dark Souls 2. And I'm playing through Resident Evil 4 in professional difficulty. I will actually be finishing the game this Friday when this is being released. But once this one is done, we'll continue to do Resident Evil games until there are no more on Fridays. So anyway, if you guys are interested, please go give me some support. To everyone who has given me some support, thank you so much. And guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.